it is so important that the three countries are discussing and have a dialogue on drugs, but it's also in order to prevent, to combat human trafficking and gun trafficking. As you know, Mexico has a demand against gun manufacturers in the US. It has now two demands, precisely because 90% of the arms used by criminal organizations in Mexico are bought in the US.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's remote session on Great Decisions. I'm Raul Alcala, a member of UMass-Boston, and I have the honor to substitute for Mary Eintema in moderating this evening's session. And I understand Mary is actually in the remote audience as well. Now I know we all will welcome her return, I especially, as an expert MC at our next program. Now, for your information, I am a former career Army officer with experience working abroad in many countries. Apropos to this session, I have a strong connection to both Canada and Mexico. I've had the pleasure of visiting Canada over the years, from Goose Bay in the Northeast to Inuvik in the Northwest, and lots of places in between. And my family has an extensive base in North Central Mexico, centered on the city of Torreon. Now, I would like to remind us as we begin, this is UMass-Boston, and UMass-Boston's mission is to foster engagement in international affairs and global cooperation. To address the topic, we are joined this evening by Canadian Consul General Rodger Cuzner and Mexican Consul General Alberto Fierro. Please see their full biographies on the UMass-Boston website. Permit me briefly to summarize some highlights of their illustrious careers. Rodger Truman Cuzner, first elected to the Canadian House of Commons in November 2000, representing Brador, Cape Breton, re-elected 5 times and recently retired in October 2019. During his 19 years in Parliament, he had key roles including Parliamentary Secretary to former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, Chief Opposition Whip, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development. And during his tenure, he focused on Veterans Affairs, Fisheries and Oceans, and more recently on workforce development and national labor issues. Alberto Fierro Garza has been a Mexican career diplomat since 1993. He headed the Cultural Institute of the Mexican Embassy in Washington and has been Consul General in Orlando, Florida, and St. Paul, Minnesota. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he served as Director General for Educational and Cultural Cooperation and Deputy Director General for North America. He was also the Director for International Affairs at the National Council for Culture and the Arts of Mexico and Director of the Social Promotion Department of the Universidad Ubiera-Minaya in Mexico City. Thank you two gentlemen very much for joining us this evening. Would you please begin with your remarks, with Canada going first?
Thanks so much, Raul, and it's great to be here with yourself and my friend Alberto. The relationship between our 3 countries is one that's very special, but it's one that's important to the world. I thought that with the topic at hand, I might give just a brief reach back on where we've come recently, just through the trade perspective. But I think, as we had talked about as we approach start time, a lot of that runs through a lot of other issues, sort of cascade out of our trade agreements. So anyway, if you could bear with me, the one thing about being in person, you can watch to see when people's eyes glaze over at the mention of statistics. So I will try my best to avoid, but just a brief look back, and we'll start in 1987, when President Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney entered into the first Canada-U.S. free trade agreement, and the tremendous benefit that came to both countries as a result of that agreement, and they felt that it could only get better if indeed the Mexico were a member and an active member in the free trade agreement. So in '93, they embarked on the North America Free Trade Agreement, and that agreement, President Guterres, George G.W. Bush, and Prime Minister Mulroney had signed that pact in 1993, and that was a deal that lasted for 25 years. It was an incredible agreement that did away with 98% of the tariffs that existed between the three countries. It developed a market of over or just under 500 million people. And 500 million sounds like a lot. It's really about 6.5% of the world's population. But with the agreement between the three countries, it constitutes about 28% of the global GDP. So it's seen as one of the most powerful free trade agreements in the world. It's created millions of jobs in all three countries. The U.S. has had tremendous benefit from it. At the time of the signing, 25 years or back in 1993, the unemployment rate was at 6.5%. The true number of unemployed was about 8.5%. And by the time it was renegotiated in 2018, the unemployment rate had dropped to 3.9%, and the real percentage of unemployed was 6.5%. So it supports up to 2018. It supported about 12 million American jobs, millions both in Canada and Mexico, and those jobs typically pay between 13 and 18% higher than other jobs. So a trade deal worth about $27 trillion a year. For those that like a little bit more granular information, that's 145 million bucks an hour. So again, an agreement that has served all three countries. In 2018, the president of the day, President Trump, felt that it was time that the deal no longer served Americans very well. Even though the statistics sort of showed that there was great benefit to the American workers and American companies, but protectionism it can be a sort of a handy tool when fear and anger fuel public debate, and I think that may have been the case in 2018. I know, being a member of Parliament up in Canada at the time, the opposition parties, the Conservatives at the time, felt that the U.S. were going to take Prime Minister Trudeau to the woodshed, and that was sort of the fear that was trying to be stoked. But anyway, the three countries hunkered down and worked their tail off on a deal. They thought they had a deal a number of different times. It was strange that in 1993 there was so much opposition from particular groups. Organized labor was very much against a free trade agreement. They were some of the biggest supporters of this particular deal. And when issues around health and safety, fair wages, they came to there were specific chapters on those deals through this free trade agreement, the renewed USMCA. They finally did arrive at a deal. It was brought back to the various elected bodies. I know in Canada that it received bipartisan support. The NDP didn't support it, but the other parties in the House did. In Congress, received bipartisan support. And I don't know if we've seen the full benefit of the deal yet. Certainly, the closure of the borders with COVID has led us to sort of question as to whether or not we've seen that full impact and that full benefit. But I still believe that there are many benefits that are yet to be seen. The reality is that our economies between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, we are so integrated, we are so interdependent. Anything outside, or if we did step back from an integrated approach to developing our economies, it would be very similar to unscrambling an egg. Take for instance the automotive sector. I think it sort of reflects how closely connected we are. If there's a part that's first manufactured in the U.S. or in Mexico, we can look at it the same way we look at tourism. Every time we go to a different country as a tourist, typically, you'll buy a T-shirt. And so if we look at the auto sector, an auto part as an industrial tourist, that auto part will cross the border, cross the various borders 8 different times. So that car, by the time that vehicle arrives on the showroom floor, it's got 8 bad T-shirts. Just to sort of speak to the fact that we do depend on each other, we rely on each other, and the New Deal, the USMCA, reflects that interdependence. I know we have a challenge sometimes. It's so easy as an elected official to sort of step back. If we hear something like, Buy America, then neither Republican or Democrat or Independent is going to stay up and say, no, we're against that. We are for that. And obviously, American workers should be the prime benefactor of any incentive on the part of their federal government. But we are so closely connected and tightly connected. I know that through the negotiations through USMCA, the business community really stepped forward and made the elected officials aware of that. So one thing that came out of the most recent meetings, there was a redoubling of the commitment to work together in the various sectors, and rather than an American auto market, for example, it should be a North American auto market. And if we work together, we continue to support each other as allies and as friends and as trading partners, and it makes good business sense, then we will be viewed by the world as a reliable, high-quality supplier of sustainable goods. And I think I'll yield to my colleague Alberto, but I would think that was just the essence of what came out of the most recent conversations in Mexico. That being said, I'll look forward to some questions on the various topics. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you. Don Alberto, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Raul, for the presentation, and Roger, dear friend, thank you for putting the context of where we are in. I'm more used to saying NAFTA than USMCA, but we are in the era of USMCA. I wanted to comment briefly about the Biden's foreign policy mentioned for the Great Decisions meeting tonight. That, as John Ikenberry stated in his article before the Ukraine war, or the Ukraine invasion, the big foreign policy was to repair alliances, to re-engage with the world, to use diplomacy against authoritarianism, and to face global challenges, to return to the Paris Accord in terms of climate and work with NATO allies in security. So the U.S. or Biden during the first 2 years most of the energy has focused on leaving Afghanistan, the long time competition with China, building new alliances with Indo-Pacific, and since last year, pushing back on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But not much has been done related to Western Hemisphere. And so that was even a complaint by my president, Lopez Obrador, in the bilateral meeting 2 weeks ago, that he said, hey, sometimes you take for granted the rest of your neighbors to the south and to the north. And he kind of wanted to tell President Biden that he should be more focused on the Western Hemisphere. President Biden said that the U.S. is the most important donor in the Western Hemisphere for development cooperation, but that the U.S. has to see many other regions. One of the big initiatives that this administration did have was last year Summit of the Americas in LA, which convened more than 20 presidents and the Prime Minister of Canada. And there were different fora. There was the Leaders Forum, and that made a big step on migration. There was the LA Declaration on Migration and Protection that for the first time assumed the importance of seeing migration in the Western Hemisphere with a regional emphasis and with cooperation between states in order to help those that are receiving, like Colombia with so many Venezuelans, Mexico at the border, Costa Rica. So migration was very important, but there was an American Partnership for Economic Prosperity speech that was a very important promise by the U.S. of really fostering economic development in the hemisphere. There was a civil society forum, a CEO forum, and also a forum for young the youth in the Americas, and there were specific discussions on agriculture, climate, and health. So that's been one of the big initiatives of this administration, of Biden's administration, regarding all of the Americas. But what is true is regarding the NALS, the North American Leaders Summit, there have been two already in this administration. One was the first one they started long time ago. I remember when I was in Canada in the late 90s, there was a big push by the three ministers of working in terms of a North American vision that then it has continued for a certain time, but during President Trump's administration, there was definitely no talk about constructing and building North America. So what happened in this last meeting? One interesting thing to share is that there was not just one public communique. There was the Mexican version, the American version of key deliverables, and the Canadian version that includes both the Mexican and the American. But all do agree that cooperation or that the most important elements that were discussed were climate change, competitiveness, creating a group of 4 people per country in order to really, as Rodger said, attract investment and for the supply chain and have a semiconductor supply chain that will help all areas of our economies, mapping minerals, etc. In climate change, the 3 countries agreed to reduce methane, develop hydrogen, and work with indigenous peoples in protecting biodiversity and conservation of water and land. A big area, again, was migration based on the LA Declaration in order to assist receiving communities of migrants, protect refugees, enhance legal pathways, taking account causes of migration, and the three countries help Western Hemisphere countries to better qualify, to better the quality of life in the three countries. There was an area of health also where there's a national North American plan for pandemic and animal influence and regional security, cybersecurity, how to combat sexual trafficking and money laundering, sharing passenger names, and continue the works of the North American dialogue on drugs. So these were the six. Well, and the sixth area, I'm sorry, had to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, protect civil rights, racial justice, and protection of LGBTQ+, and work with indigenous peoples in the three countries in search for innovative solutions, taking into account also traditional knowledge to create for the creation of better jobs. So this was basically what happened. For my, I was very interested in seeing, I mean, how much can you advance in a 1 day or several hour meeting? But the interesting thing is that the three countries had been working in all these deliverables, and what was done during that meeting was precisely talk about all the things that the three countries had been working since the previous meeting in order to bring these deliverables to the table. And it has been called the meeting of the three amigos. Funny that they chose for the Spanish name. I guess it has to do with our Hollywood idea of the three amigos too. But the most important thing is disregarding the differences between countries. Well, the day before the NALS happened, Canada and Mexico won against the US a panel that precisely has to do with North American cars and how our two countries were fighting precisely to say that whatever is done in Mexico or in Canada should be considered part of the North, that cars should not be considered US made, but we should be thinking of North American cars, because the production, as Rodger mentioned, is precisely totally North American. An American car has 40% of pieces made in Mexico, and I don't know what percentage of Canadian, but I'm sure it's a big bunch. So there is Canada and the US have asked to see Mexico's energy policies and thinking that the protection of Mexican energy entities is discriminating Canadian and American enterprises. That was not discussed there because there's a panel, but that was precisely the importance of this conversation, that regardless of the difference that there could be, the three countries, the three leaders can sit down and work on the important deliverables and the importance of cooperation and enhancing our integration and our collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. One area that you both mentioned that's vital in the agenda of the three countries and has been for a long time is migration. And so if I could just take the liberty of asking you, two gentlemen, what techniques, looking ahead, might be useful to diffuse some of the problems we've had with migration both to Canada and to the United States, and Mexico for sure from the south. So would you gentlemen please speak to looking ahead, what's possible in the area of migration?
Yes, I could probably start off because certainly on our border, it isn't as difficult a situation as it is on the southern border for the United States. But we still feel that we can play a role, to try to get to some of the root causes. In Canada, we bring in probably about 30,000 annually, 30,000 migrants annually that come seeking refuge to our border. So it seems pretty minor, pretty minuscule, with when you compare it to the southern border. But we see a role for Canada in trying to get to the root cause. And when we go to some of these countries, we see the poverty, we see the desperation that some people live in. We feel that we can play a role in trying to, strengthen some of the processes, some of the democratic institutions. When we, if we can alleviate their work with economic development in some of these countries, sometimes, the best way to help a community is to make an investment that's going to bring some jobs and prosperity. And so we feel that there is a role for us to play. And I'm confident that Canada will continue, has played that role and will continue to try to assist in that manner.
Migration is, something that is important is that we the three countries do agree that as an objective, migration should be safe, orderly, humane, with respect of human rights, and that we have to work on giving migrants access to legal pathways. If there are no legal pathways, as we know, there will always be undocumented migration. And also, migration has to do with the needs of the economy. It's not only people migrate because a lot of them are fleeing their countries because of violence, because of not having enough opportunities, but also many, and that's been the case of many millions of Mexicans coming here, is they know that coming here, even risking coming with no documents, is working hard. They will do 7 times better than Mexico, and they will, in a long term, reach the American dream a lot easier and quicker than in their own countries. Some of the things that happened also during that week was, the day before the bilateral meeting between President Biden and President López Obrador, President Biden announced a new program it's a humanitarian parole program, very similar to what was done with Ukrainians. That I read today, there's more than 100,000 already Ukrainians in the U.S. that have arrived in the last year. Well, a similar program was launched for Venezuela a couple months ago, and now for Haiti, Cuba, and Nicaragua, where the U.S. will be receiving 30,000 people from those countries if they apply from another country, not at the border. And the idea is that if they arrive to the border and they cross, they will be returned to Mexico. My undersecretary this week was saying that precisely because of this new humanitarian parole program, the number of Venezuelans and people from Nicaragua and Cuba at the Mexican border has reduced because it's giving legal pathways. Another thing that was announced like a month ago is a new 100,000 more H-2A visas for workers from Mexico and Central America. And H-2A or H-2B visas are visas for temporary work that they apply in their country and they come work up to 9 months and then they return. One interesting thing at the North American Leaders Summit was that Canada and Mexico offered to share best practices with the U.S. precisely with the program that Rodger mentioned that has every year, at least from Mexico, more than, I think it's around 25,000 Mexicans go to Canada and they fly and they have a contract and both governments supervise that the conditions and the contracts are respected. So those things in giving legal pathways is the way to go.
Thank you very much for all that. I'll remind all attendees to ask a question, please use the raised hand function. I believe we have Ed Martins now on board. So Ed, please disclose yourself and ask your question.
Hello, all. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the speech. I'd like to speak about, you were talking about migration and things like that. Is if the possibility of expanding the U.S.-Canada-Mexico trade agreement, if you could expand it further south into places like Salvador or Guatemala, Honduras, as to stop migration from those countries. If they develop economically, they'd probably be much less likely to come here, or at least come here illegally. Is there any possibility of it? Do you see any possibility of expanding it even further down there, or possibly all the way down to Panama?
I don't really think there is a trade agreement. For example, Mexico has trade agreement with all the Central American countries. The U.S. also has it. So through those trade agreements, and there is I didn't mention, but one of the most important topics that was spoken first in Marrakesh by the UN, then in LA at the Summit of the Americas, and now at NALS, is precisely fighting the root causes of migration. And one of them has to do with promoting development, economic development in those countries. And so there is an agreement of investing in southern Mexico and Central America precisely to foster better opportunities.
If I could weigh in on that as well, Ed, I think you're hitting a pretty important aspect of beyond migration, but just helping people out of poverty. I recall back. Paul Martin was our prime minister, and the leaders were heading to a G7 in the UK, and the G7 tasked Gordon Brown, who was the finance minister in the UK at the time, and Ralph Goodale, who was our finance minister in Canada, and there was a leader from the African nations as well. That the three of them were sort of tasked with bring us back some possible solutions for the African continent. What is it we can do? What can the nations of the world do to help alleviate some of the poverty, some of the strife that they continue to face generation after generation? And we were all taken by the fact there was nothing like, we need more aid. We need more money coming from the wealthy countries. It was about access to markets. It was how do we get what few goods we have? How do we get how do we get a fair trade in the goods that we produce? And so I think that goes back to greater access is what you're looking at in the question that you posed.
Yeah. President López Obrador did mention his idea of that it would be great of integration for the whole Western Hemisphere. As you know, that was a discussion of the first summit of the Americas in the mid 1990s, but getting all those countries with so different perspectives to agree upon trade initiatives is not an easy thing. So that's where I do think, well, we were able to renegotiate USMCA, and it was scary months during the negotiation, but it was true that we had already been working on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that was a way of modernizing NAFTA. And so at the end, a good part of USMCA had to do with what Canada and Mexico and the US had already renegotiated for the TPP. One thing I don't understand today is why has the US not rejoined that TPP, and it looked for other alliances, for example, with Australia, but not with the whole Indo-Pacific countries.
Oh, well, very interesting perspective indeed. We'll ask Tom Smith to give us the answer to that, since he's coming on now, and he's an economist, among other things. No, I'm only kidding. Tom, welcome aboard, and please present your question.
Thank you, Raul. My question is for Consul General Cuzner. I grew up in northern Vermont, very close to the Canadian border, and I remember the days when we would go back and forth without even having to check in with anybody and spend the evening in Quebec. So my question is regard to the border. You mentioned the fact that the border was closed for quite a while because of the pandemic. Now that it's reopened, are there or how are we dealing with the residual issues of it being closed for a while, and how is commerce? And secondly, what issues do you have to work with the U.S. Concerning illegal crossings, not only of people, but of drugs and guns and that sort of thing?
Tom, I'm sure that you were one of those young guys that would leave northern Vermont and scoot up to Quebec, where the drinking age was 18 at the time. There were a few people who took advantage of that. It was a strange, as the pandemic, I think both countries did a good job just to control the spread of the virus. I think both countries should be commended with the actions that they did take at the outset of the pandemic, restricting the travel across the borders. But they continued to keep the trucks moving. They continued to keep the borders open enough that goods continued to flow. So I think we have to recognize that. But there seemed to be a disparity in how we were treating the northern states with the southern states, where you could fly into Florida and vacation in Florida, but you couldn't drive your vehicle across the border to the states, and that was very much the elected officials in the northern states really felt that they were being played hard on that particular issue. Now that it's open, it's I've crossed a half a dozen times myself. Of course, the diplomatic passport's a little helpful in that regard, but nonetheless, things seem to be stepping back up. Speaking with some of the tourism operators in Old Orchard Beach, some of the I think there's some anticipation at the ski operations that things are coming back to normal. I know in my old riding in my area in Cape Breton, we have two incredible golf courses, Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs, that are both rated in the top 100 golf courses in the world. And 50% of our clientele are American golfers. And, the caddies love that because they get tipped in the Ben Franklins, and they appreciate that. And the numbers were off the charts this year. So things have bounced back. So, in light of the what had certainly been a grievance, seems to have addressed it. You don't get that money back, that you lost, but those that survived, I think, and I think they're doing really well now. Not sure if that answers your question, but.
Thank you very much. Okay, can we pose the next question? Tom, is that okay with you? Yeah.
Well, just I would add the second part, whether we focus so much on the Mexican border, but I know there are some issues with illegal things crossing the border, and I think our law authorities work pretty well together. But do you have any comments on whether that's increased with the increased migration flows and that sort of thing?
We just did, as a matter of fact, a border tour 2 months ago. We took elected officials from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York, and met with officials on both sides, and they sort of brought us up to speed on new measures. Some of the technology now that they're using, really sophisticated technology with drone coverage, what have you. It's still in Canada we have a ban on assault weapons, and handguns are another thing that we have a problem with, those coming into Canada. But they continue to invest in some of the best technology, the training, and I'll tell you, they did a couple of demonstrations with the dogs that they have at the border, and it's incredible, what they're able to do. So it'll be an ongoing process.
And I'd like to mention also, in a North American perspective, it is so important that the three countries are discussing and have a dialogue on drugs, but it's also in order to prevent, to combat human trafficking and gun trafficking. As you know, Mexico has a demand against gun manufacturers in the US. It has now two demands, precisely because 90% of the arms used by criminal organizations in Mexico are bought in the US and brought illegally to Mexico. So that's clearly something that we alone cannot arrange. But if we work together, the three countries, and the same as fighting the fentanyl epidemic, destroying, not allowing the chemicals to arrive from Asia, and not allowing criminal organizations in the three countries to be producing those deathly drugs.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your comments. Could we switch over to James? James, would you be kind enough to present your question?
Sure. Very good. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'll take a quick moment, Consul General Cuzner, to congratulate you on the assault weapons bans and reasonable restrictions on handgun control as a model. I was also one of those 18-year-olds who had a great time going from Boston to Montreal once upon a time. My question, could both of you, the two Consuls General, please comment on clean tech, and in particularly cross-border collaboration as it relates to clean technology for maybe energy sources, the sources of energy, electric vehicles. And then I'm also curious if there's been any sort of developments about a timeline for autonomous trucking to assist with all of the cross-border transport.
You want to go first this time?
as you wish. Yeah, as part of the North American Summit, there was as I mentioned, this creation of this group of four experts or four high leaders from each of the countries, precisely to work on how to make the supply chains of the automotive be better, and it has to do with the possibility working in the three countries for the electric vehicles that they can be charged, making sure that there will be places to charge, and that we will be working also together in all the batteries that are needed for that electric vehicle. So it is one of the very important areas that the three countries agree upon.
As Alberto had said, it was front and center in the recent discussions. Let me add that with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS bill, with the hundreds of billions of dollars that will be invested in those sectors here in the United States over the next number of years, that will shift the entire, the impact that will have on modernizing the economy of the United States is incredible. And it's to the benefit of the US economy, but geopolitically, make no mistake that it's a direct initiative to make sure that China does not take the position as the world leader in tech development. You put a lot of pressure on Canada and Mexico by doing so, because we got to be in the game. We have to be in the game. We did a fall economic update, a financial update that's done each year. And Minister Freeland, she had announced about just under $7 billion in that sector to look at hydrogen, to look at renewable energies and invest in innovation in that sector. But very much aware and knowing that when she tables her budget in March, she said at the time, the $7 billion, which is a lot for Canada, she said that is a down payment on where we have to be. And so I think the three countries are absolutely aligned. We're very much fortunate in Canada that we have cobalt, graphite, lithium. We've got so many of the minerals. We are at a point where we aren't mining many of them yet. We know that the processing to get through to mining those minerals, it is a process, but we've tried to accelerate that and bring it to the fore. I think, with what's taken place with Russia, with what's taken place with China, and just the whole geopolitical landscape, the three countries realize that it's your friends, it's your allies, it's those trusted relationships that you have to go back and rely on going forward. So that I think, and Alberto would agree, that came out loud and clear through the recent meeting.
Yeah, and President López Obrador, for example, presented to the two leaders the Sonora plan. Sonora is a state that borders with the U.S. and that has a lot of lithium and lots of sun, and there's this big important project that has to do with electromobility, installations for electric vehicles, and work together to have batteries and accelerate the production of semiconductors.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mary, would you like to present a question, please?
Sure, this is great. I just, I'm not doing the work this time. Thank you, Raul. I can just ask questions. So For both or either Consul General, thinking about Biden's foreign policy, one of his explicit goals is the protection or promotion of democracy. And this is a question that concerns the U.S. internally, and it seems increasingly that almost no country is exempt from these concerns, whether it's about populism or authoritarianism. And so I'm wondering if you could give any insight about what's going on in your own countries, if you perceive also that there is a need for a struggle to protect democracy. So thanks very much.
One thing that happened also thank you for the question, Mary, and great to see you. In the North American Leaders Summit was that the three countries did agree to condemn the Brazil movement to try to make a coup that had happened the day before. So in that sense, the three countries did agree in supporting democracy in Brazil. Regarding, for example, the Summit of the Americas, President López Obrador did not go, and he claimed that he would not go because not all the countries of the hemisphere had been invited. Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua had not been invited, and in his perspective, it's better to discuss with everyone than not discuss. And that was his position and the position of Mexico. But that doesn't mean that Mexico is not committed to promoting democracy. And within Mexico, there is we have a very important electoral institute, and we have many, many years of working precisely in making our country a full democratic one.
Mary, I arrived in Boston 2 years ago on January 6th. It didn't get a lot of play at the time. There were other things going on that day that sort of drained most of the news cycle. But we were listen, Canada, we watch U.S. politics so closely. It's a sport in Canada, and we care about U.S. politics. We see some of the concerns that have taken root here in the U.S., not so much in New England, but in other parts of the country. We see them drifting into Canada, and we would have our own concern with domestic issues. But last year we had the truckers. They called it first the truckers' protest. Really, what it was a bunch of protesters that had some trucks, and it was anybody with a grievance sort of landed in Ottawa, in the nation's capital, and honked horns and ran their engines for 3 weeks. At that time they were protesting mandates, vaccine mandates. Some were protesting the vaccines. Most Canadians, you can have an opinion on the mandates and whether or not the mandates are worthwhile, but you can't argue on the science. Canadians are past that. We had 87% of Canadians had at least one shot of the vaccine, so we're pretty united on that. So that really hasn't. We see it as a very vocal. We're very concerned about it. Most of our networks now don't really give them a whole lot of airtime, or major cable networks don't give them a whole lot of airtime. And a lot of the times, the hypocrisy they end up shooting themselves in the foot. James had asked the question about the autonomous vehicles. Canadians, we thought it was sort of cute when Elon Musk tweeted, you know, "Way to go, Canadian truckers. We're really proud of you." Meanwhile, he's doing everything he can to develop autonomous trucks to put them out of business. So, you know, there is a little hint of hypocrisy in the game sometimes. But no, I think we realize that it's something that we can't take for granted, and we have to. I think education and, you know, about our democratic institutions is imperative, and I think most elected officials, regardless of their political stripe, understand that.
Oh, thank you very much. Mary Mendoza, you get the last question. You're on mute, Mary.
Sorry, I forgot about that. I'm actually picking up on that comment on social media, specifically on misinformation for vaccines, especially all the misinformation that occurs in foreign languages. Consul General Fierro, how much luck, if any, have you had getting misinformation addressed from places like Facebook?
We use Facebook more for information to our public here about our services, but not much more than that.
Well, I guess my question is, have you had, there's a lot of misinformation out there floating on Facebook and Twitter and places like that. Have you had any luck pointing out to Facebook, this is just completely false, can you please remove it?
I in particular haven't done that, but I do know that at the state level, yes, there are some complaints, but that's part of our new reality. It's very difficult to know what is true and what is not. So mostly governments do their own statements, and those are the ones that should be credible.
Thank you very much for those comments. It's certainly the case that demagoguery and misinformation are challenges to democracy everywhere, and democracy is not something that you achieve and then can rest. It has to be pursued every day. Gentlemen, it's been wonderful having this conversation, a very illuminating conversation, and we thank you both, Consuls Rodger and Alberto. Thank you also to audience members for your insightful questions. Good night, everybody.